Having talked now about the cult of Manon, I would like to talk about now the cult of Stromfels. And there are a lot of different kind of variations on how this kind of works itself out. There's the cult of Manon, obviously, we have this kind of greater god of the seas, and we see him also like extended over to the elven Mothlon, right? So we kind of talked about that, but Stromfels plays a very important place in the greater lore of Manon. And depending on what version of the Warhammer Fantasy RPG you're taking a look at, Stromfels is either an aspect of Manon or an actual, like, kind of like Janus. He's like the Greek god Janus, Janus, whatever. He's the Janus. He's the other side of his head. Whereas, we talked about how Manon is very wrathful, and he is very fickle in his display of both restraint and mercy, but also in his display of just outright power and command of the seas. And Stromfels, in the later editions of Warhammer Fantasy, is talked about being the portion of Manon that is wrathful, that is destructive, that does kind of punish the sinners. So let's talk about Stromfels here a little bit. The Lord of the Raging Sea, as he is typically called. And just like Manon, he is primarily kind of warp-shipped in and around Marienburg. And during, I think it's like, the year is like 1109 or something like that. There's this very specific year in which case the Treaty of Amity and Commerce with the High Elves is signed, and it basically outlaws the warship of Stromfels. And Stromfels is seen as this kind of destructive god of predation and of destroying and wrecking and piracy and human sacrifice, pretty much everything that has to do with death and destruction on the open ocean or as a result of the ocean, hurricanes, stuff like that, vortexes, maelstroms, those squalls, those are all kind of aspects of or portions of Stromfels in a lot of ways. But you could also argue that those are also portions of Manon. That's why there's that kind of duality between these two gods, and why they're almost always kind of put hand in hand. But that treaty, like I was talking about, it banned the warship of the cult of Stromfels in Marienburg, and it was outlawed entirely. So pretty much if you were seen doing this, you were persecuted, you were tortured, and you were killed. So as a very kind of the adverse to that, the cult of Stromfels, one of their kind of strictures is that you cut out the tongue of a cult of Manon member, of the clergy of the cult of Manon. So they have a very strong duality between the two, and Stromfels itself is considered neutral, but very vicious and very wrathful. So it's got a lot of crazy kind of duality going with it. So the symbol we took a look for, or we saw for Manon, was that kind of sea crown, right? Well, the symbol for Stromfels is like a trident dripping blood. So the kind of almost like a direct parody of the crown of Manon. It's almost supposed to look exactly the same, just dripping blood and, bolts of lightning coming out of it. And Stromfels himself is kind of personified as this giant shark, which is horrifying. We've talked about my fear of the great depths. Well, a giant shark like a megalodon is up there with some of the scariest shit in the world to me, next to like a Cthulhu-esque squid. But Manon is actually worshipped, though, Stromfels is worshipped in some portions of the world a little more openly. It's pretty much the same thing with Manon, like throughout the coasts and stuff like that. There is worship that is done to Stromfels, but it's done a lot more clandestine. You find these little altars that are more often than not a simple little artifact or a simple little token to Stromfels, versus the kind of shrines and temples that you would find to Manon. With Stromfels, though, he has actually kind of a pretty big power, or I guess like a foothold in Sartosa. In Sartosa, there's a temple of Myrmidia that was repurposed to become a temple of Stromfels. So that's actually one of the kind of chief temples. It's really the only temple to Stromfels that really operates openly without really much fear of prosecution, because Sartosa is kind of this, anachronistic land that is completely filled with pirates and people that kind of hail from Astalia and Tilia, and they're all mercenaries. So it's a little bit more free reign there. But Stromfels, unlike other gods, is considered Stromfels, the name Stromfels throughout the majority of the world. Like if you were to go to Ulthuan, oh, Stromfels? Oh yeah, we know him. We hate him. You don't worship him, right? Because you're going to die if you do. And it's like that throughout pretty much the majority of the old world and the world as a whole, except for really in Estalia, where he is called El Bicho del Mar, which is actually the sea bug, which is a very interesting translation for that word, but it works out how it does. So we kind of see him as this very interesting, wrathful god, and in a lot of the same ways that we see Manon, but you see that he is this direct connection to destruction, to calamity, to any kind of what's the term for issues at sea, like catastrophes and stuff like that happen on the open ocean. And again, we've talked about how Manon is connected to that as well. How, okay, if you don't have a priest of Manon on your boat and you're not praying to Manon, there's a really a good chance that that he's just going to outright sink your boat. So it's pretty interesting here how we kind of see this very close duality between these two, and how in the earlier versions or earlier editions of the lore, it talks about Stromfels as, again, being that aspect, and how he kind of morphs into, rather than being an aspect of Manon, another duality of Manon. So it's very, very, very interesting of him, or of it. But throughout the majority of the lore, there's not as much mention of Stromfels as there is of Manon. Like, he's almost always seen as a giant shark. All of these pictures I'm showing you guys are really some of the scant pictures that exist for Manon himself. For Stromfels himself. He's sometimes called the Wrecker, in I believe in the first edition RPG. But what we're going to be seeing with Vampire Coast is some interesting stuff, right? We're going to be talking about Solastra Darfin, right, and how they've talked about how she kind of comes back from the depths as a result of Stromfels. So I didn't get a chance to read the little lore blurb that Annie Hall released about her, but as we play through the campaign of Total War Warhammer 2 Curse of the Vampire Coast, I'm really curious to see if there will be a larger or greater intersection with Stromfels for Solastra and maybe Manon for Aranessa Saltspite. Maybe that'll be the kind of the duality between these two, is that Aranessa outright hates the Vampire Coast and is empowered by Manon, whereas Solastra Darfin is kind of like seemingly like kind of like a rogue agent of Vampire Coast, right? She's a part of it, but she doesn't seem actually like in the same breath as Count Noctilus or Luther Harkin. So it's pretty interesting to see how this role will actually work out, and maybe there's like a building in Sartosa that is either like a building to Manon or a building to Stromfels, depending on who holds it, right? If Aranessa Saltspite holds Sartosa, is it a temple of Manon? And if Solastra Darfin holds Sartosa, is it going to be a temple of Stromfels? I'd really love to see that kind of duality and something that kind of play heavy into the lore of these two lords, or ladies, I guess that's a better way to put it, because they talk so much about Manon being linked to both of them. Aranessa Saltspite is considered the queen of the tides and the daughter of Manon, whereas Stromfels is supposedly bring Solastra Darfin back to life. I don't really know in what capacity or what she kind of, or what kind of weight she places in their relationship. Like, is it, okay, you were summoned as a pawn of mine, or you were summoned as like, hey, I'm going to curate you to become something important in my eyes, for I am Stromfels, the almighty Shark Master, the Sharknado of Total War Warhammer. Oh my god. So I'm really curious to see what we get to see with the campaigns for all four of these lords of Total War Warhammer Curse of Vampire Coast. With that coming out about 2 weeks from now, we'll be able to flesh this out a little bit more. But I really wanted to talk a little bit about Stromfels, and there isn't a whole ton of lore on him. I mean, as you guys can kind of see, it's more heavily focused on Manon, and Stromfels' lore kind of deals more with like hate and punishment of the cult of Manon, humans and sea elves. Remember, sea elves are the elves that used to dwell in the area that is now Marienburg. That used to be an elven colony. So the symbol of Marienburg has to do with elves too. So that all kind of plays hand in hand together. Maybe a lore video on Marienburg would actually kind of be a fun thing to do. But again, guys, I just wanted to talk a little bit about Stromfels, since we did talk about Manon, I feel like you kind of need it. You need to talk about one if you're not going to. You need to talk about both if you're going to talk about one. So we talked about Stromfels the shark today. So hopefully this gave you a pretty good idea of what we might be in for with Vampire Coast and how Stromfels and Manon kind of play into each other. But if you guys have any questions about Manon or Stromfels for that matter, go ahead and leave a comment below. Love to hear some of your thoughts about how they're going to play into this with the DLC. I'm very excited for things to come out here. I mean, after having kind of played with the units during the Everchosen, I'm now just like chomping at the bit. That is not a pun on the fact that he's a fucking shark, chomping at the bit to play the actual campaign. I'm excited to do it. I can't decide if I'm going to do Celastra or Aranessa, and I'll probably do a poll on the channel. So if you weigh on that in the channel or in the comment section below if you want as well, guys. But as always, thanks so much for watching here today. Have a good one and take care.